Hey, John, how are you?
Welcome. I'm doing just great. It's a great to be on your show, focused on purpose. So thank you, Davin.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you here. And for those of you who are tuning in to the Finding Purpose LiveCast, today we're here with John Baldoni, who is the author of Lead with Purpose, amongst many other works. He's a fellow Michigan guy living here in Michigan in the area. And, he wrote about Lead with Purposes from, 2012, I believe, if memory serves me correct. And you were writing about purpose and talking about purpose and thinking about it before, this purpose space, or what Aaron Hirsch calls the purpose economy, really kind of came into fruition, right, John?
Well, I think you have to give some credit to Rick Warren, who wrote
Oh,
The Purpose
absolutely.
Driven Life. But in the business sector, yeah, that's great.
So for those of you who haven't heard of you, or haven't heard of your book, or haven't heard of your work, walk us through, how, and it sounds like maybe even Rick Warren, who wrote Purpose Driven Life, maybe there was something that triggered that into you in the business world writing purpose. But walk us through your background, who you are, kind of how that led into you writing and then transitioning kind of into the purpose space.
Right. Well, thank you for the invitation. Well, interesting. My mission statement is I help men and women learn to live and lead with greater purpose and grace. And we'll talk about that later. So, purpose has been an anchor for me in my coaching practice. And I have a wonderful analogy about it. I was in Amsterdam for a keynote, and my wife and I went to the Rijksmuseum. And as we all know, Holland, I will say that, was a seagoing power. And so in the Rijksmuseum, there are very many um, uh, pictures of sailing ships and things like that. And you think of this tiny little country that really, spanned the globe all the way to what we call the Dutch East Indies today, Java, and a little bit into the New World, certainly, with a place most people know of New Amsterdam, aka not the brewery, but New York City, Manhattan. So anyway, but there was a boat there, that or a ship, that caught my eye. It was becalmed in sea, it was becalmed, so there was no wind and anything, and the boat was fine, but it was just sort of listless. And I got this image in my mind that, that's what it's like to live without purpose. Life might be comfortable, but you're not going anywhere, And so purpose is that drive that pushes you forward. And certainly I was influenced by the thinking by Rick Warren in The Purpose Driven Life, which is anchored in his world through his faith, but I come at it from a non-faith based perspective. But I think purpose, and I do this in coaching a lot. It's what's your purpose? What do you want to achieve? And interestingly enough, I'm finding I developed a little questionnaire for essentially for people. I've done mentoring for students and taught that. And I give them this purpose questionnaire. More and more, I've actually been giving this purpose questionnaire to people who are in not just career transitions, but my age, who are transitioning to their final work chapter or retirement. And so purpose resonates throughout our lives. It's as Simon Sinek would say, it's our catalyst for our why. And so that's how I got involved in it. And today it's transitioned into a broader concept, which I link it into grace. So that's the nutshell of purpose for me. So.
I love hearing that story of how that came to be. And I love the analogy of that you just shared. You might feel comfortable in life, but if you really are not living life on purpose, if you're not leading with purpose, you're really not going anywhere. That's so, so powerful. And I think so many times people, think of purpose as this fluff word. I know one of the things that came to my mind, I know you recently had a mutual friend of ours, Rich Sheridan, was on your show. And in Joy Inc., he talks a lot about purpose, and he always equates it to an airplane and how there's this thrust of purpose. And so, both of you kind of even come at from this point that purpose is this thing that is either propelling you or pulling you forward. Without it, you're really stationary. That's really good.
Right. Yes, and so it's what it's implementing and making it work for you. And then I also put it in the book Lead with Purpose is giving your organization a reason to believe in itself. So it's an 8-chapter book. 7 chapters are on organizational development as it relates to it, and the final chapter is yourself, which is what's purpose in your own life and how you can implement it. So
I was very intrigued about that when I read your book, because there was the heavy emphasis on organizational purpose, obviously of being a business book and being about leadership, but then coming back down to that individual sense of purpose, which we all right now need to identify more than ever. I think that there's almost an epidemic on mattering, as my friend Zach Mercurio would say. People are not realizing or having a disconnect to how their work matters anymore. And there's there's this responsibility to organizations to create environments where employees and people can feel like their contributions matter, right? Not just this pat on the back, but actually seeing how what they do translates into shared contribution to whatever the company's purpose is. And I know that you've talked about that for years.
Without question. And what I've come down to is that purpose is the why, what gets us up in the morning. And we spread out from there. But from an organizational sense, purpose sparks our vision, our mission, and is the initiator of our values. So what do I mean by that? Vision is our becoming. We want to do X. We want to become this. So it's the process of our aspiration. This is where purpose meets dreams. And this is where we put it into reality. Mission is our doing, what we build and how we accomplish things. Values is the sense of belonging, which is what holds us together. And the analogy I always make is that you can achieve your vision and you can achieve your mission in spite of people, no problem. But how much better is it to do it with people? And that's where your values come in. And that's where grace becomes in. Purpose is our why, grace is our how.
So that's very interesting to me, because I love how you talked about the difference between purpose and mission and vision. And I know there's a lot of thoughts around purpose being the why, purpose being related to why. I share that they're a little different sometimes in that purpose is your reason for being, why is your reason for doing. So your purpose is what you exist to do. The why is your reason for actually doing that. But I love your articulation of mission and vision. But you said something there was huge, which was this idea of becoming. And I think when we really talk about purpose, there's purpose that already apparently exists. Some people don't know that it's already inside them. There is purpose that apparently exists within an organization. It was there from the very beginning as to why the company went into business in the first place. But then there's this idea of becoming. There's, again, that thrust, that pull of, well, who are you becoming and who is your organization becoming? And I really want to get to grace, but before we get to grace, talk to me about this idea of becoming and how you link purpose to becoming organizationally and individually.
Well, vision is what points you in the right direction. Okay. And so when we define ourselves by what we want to achieve, it is a series of becoming. So I would say my vision is to to climb Mount Everest. I'd say, no, your vision is to become an expert climber. Your mission might be to climb Everest. And then what are you going to do next? So that's why vision is open-ended. And that's why you say, take this for a business analogy, would be a cardiac care center. We want to be the best cardiac care center in Southeast Michigan. Okay, what does that mean? All right. Well, it means, how do we define that? Well, our mission is to provide cardiac care and services in a number of dimensions. To do that, we need cardiologists, we may need cardiac surgeons, we need a lot of techs, we need a dedicated nursing corps, all of this stuff. And to be the best, to be the most renowned or whatever, the number one, that's even if you are become number one, you have to keep, or the most trusted, most respected. That's maybe quantifiable, but it's always, you always have to improve to maintain your ability to serve at the best of your ability. So it's that definition for you. It's in a way never ending, because it's pointing you in the right direction. And your mission can be changeable. Not every organization changes its mission, but at times you can incorporate new things, or due to competition or circumstance and stuff, you add something different to it. But the vision of being the best in your particular region or area, that's going to be a universal for a period of time. And so that's why I call it the process of becoming, because it points you in that right direction, and you've got to deliver it so that you are always improving yourself. And it's both a macro and a micro. So let's take the macro. We've talked about the macro, which is that continuous improvement. Well, the micro, from a mission standpoint, okay, we have to develop good talent. So we're gonna, whom are we hiring? Okay, both as nurses, as cardiac techs, our residents. What's our residency program like? What do we have a fellowship program for that? And how are we treating our core faculty and core staff, core physicians, cardiologists? Are we providing them opportunities to grow and expand their talents and opportunities? How are we on the equipment side? Do we have too much? Do we have too little? How are we meshing in with the rest of our healthcare within our region? Are we complementary? And all of those sorts of things. So this is where you dimensionalize the issue, but you always try to get better, which is what you're all about anyway, to become the most respected cardiac care center in your region. So
that was a really good outline and a lot of depth there, that if you're listening to this, I would implore you to go and get the recording when we're done and listen to that last 4 minutes, because there was a lot of wisdom packed into that. You mentioned something, I really love the Everest analogy. And as you were saying that, here's kind of what I heard. Let me know your thoughts on this. I know obviously Simon does his thing with the why, the what, and the how, and kind of what I heard, and correct me if there's maybe a different perspective, but I almost got this visual of purpose is the what is it that we exist to do, right? Vision is the where are we going? And mission is the how we're going to arrive at where we're going.
Well, mission is more the what, and purpose is the why we're doing this, because we want to serve our customer, going back to our cardiac care, we want to serve our patient base and our community. And so how we do that, and why we do it, because we're focused on it. So I parse it a little bit differently, but here's the big point. I mean, It's fine to parse it as it makes sense for yourself. The most important thing is to be focused on improving yourself, giving yourself a reason to improve. And what are you doing for other people? How you label that is less important. It's the what you do and the impact you're having. That's really kind of what it is. I mean, there are organizations that conflate mission and vision. Who cares? If it works for them, it works for them.
As long as they live it out, right? Because if you just structure it and put it in a handbook or put it on a wall and then don't do it, you might as well have not gone through the exercise in the first place.
Right. And here's the thing that people often conflate, and I think I talk about it in the book, and I learned this from Marshall Goldsmith, is that people conflate goals with vision or mission. And this is where, a goal is to climb Mount Everest. Okay, what do you do next? Well, that's an issue. And here's a real serious problem. And Michael Phelps talks about this in his new documentary about Quest for Gold. What happens to athletes after they've reached that pinnacle? To be the best of the best. And Michael, Phelps was the best of the best for 18 times over. Okay. All the gold medals that he won. And then where do you go from there? So that's when we get in trouble by conflating a goal, which is tangible. It may or may not be achieved, but it's how we do it and why we do it is have to question ourselves. And that's where the overlying purpose is. I want to be the best in my field. So somebody like Michael Phelps has now transitioned. He's become a spokesman for mental health issues and things like that. And I don't know his life story. I mean, I don't know what he's doing specifically, but he seems to, I give him the great kudos for the courage and candor, which he's addressed the challenges that he's faced. But the same thing happens with organizations. So for example, if they conflate sales goals with purpose, then what do we do after we achieve the sales goal? Well, get a new sales goal. Okay. But how are we doing it? Why are we doing it? These kinds of things. So that's why we need to keep them separate. So it's really conflating goals with mission, vision, and values. That's the challenge. Goals are important. Don't misunderstand, but they're not the same as mission and vision. So.
Very well said. Very well said. Now, you had mentioned earlier before we kind of went kind of deep into the, structure and semantics of all of the, not confusing things, but you mentioned a few moments ago the word grace. And there's some people that probably heard that 5 minutes ago and said, well, what does grace have to do with purpose? Why, what, how, mission, vision? Like, where does grace fit into the conversation?
Well, thank you. Just to iterate real quickly, the way I define it is that purpose is our why we do what we do, and then grace becomes our how. And so grace is how we treat one another. It's also how we treat ourselves. But grace for me is the catalyst for the greater good. And so that was the operative principle behind my writing the book, Grace, A Leader's Guide to a Better Us, which came out in May 2019. And I define grace as an acronym: generosity, respect, compassion. Okay, those are pretty obvious grace attributes of grace. To give it some muscle, we need the leadership component, hence the leadership guide. So it's about acting, A for action, and E for energizing. So leaders mobilize people to mobilize for the greater good, but also bring people together for the common cause. And as doing so, they energize the organization. And when you do it the right way, with people, for people, together, it becomes a form of grace. But grace is that ability to connect with others, to be fully human, be compassionate, respect one another, act out of convictions, and grace is endemic to basically all cultures. It's why often here in the West we affiliate it with a faith, and it is. It's probably in our DNA. There's something called the quote altruism gene, which is basically our inclination to care for one another. And so that's where my idea of grace comes in. And what fascinates me most about it, I think, is the dimensions of it, their connectedness to it. Grace also has a physicality to it in the sense that we are centered when we have grace. We all know people who just seem to have it all together. And though they draw people to us because we like them, yes, but they seem to have it, they're centered in their lives. They live a life where they integrate work and community and family. Everything is in a degree of balance or a degree of integration. They're centered. And there's also grace in the physicality of motion. in art. We see this in ballet, certainly, because it has a motion component. Dance, it has a motion component to it, but we see it in painting, all kinds of things, in photography, in light. And all of this kind of comes together and enhances what grace is all about. Now, today we're living in which I call an upside down world. And I will have a little book coming out very soon called Grace Notes, Leading in an Upside Down World. And it's all about how leaders, quote, keep it real, how they stay focused, but how they stay focused for themselves, yes, but also for their teams. So how they address fear, isolation, displacement, how they act with courage, how they act with compassion, how they do for others, how they stay connected, and how they bring people together.
That's awesome. And it's never, what you just shared there, it's never been, I know you have your LinkedIn Live called Grace Under Pressure. And I would say that the need for grace, but then also the attack on grace, has never been greater. We've never needed more grace with each other. And I love the acronym. And I like how you connected that back to purpose. Very, very, very well done. Talk to me, this new book that you have, kind of in an upside down world. There's so many people saying, how do we move on from kind of where we're at? And I think what you're talking about is really a great starting point. Elaborate to me what you mean more by this upside down world concept and how.
Well, I'm glad you chose that word, move on, because we're not moving on. We will move forward.
Yes.
Because first, the thing we need to do, and I do address it in Grace Notes, is grief. All of us have had loss. Some of us have had tragic losses, family members, dear friends who have passed. But we've all lost our sense of, to a degree, a sense of community that comes from work. We've missed the comradeship of physical contact with friends, colleagues, being at work. After work, being at work. We've lost the community touch, which comes through community activities. There's a great deal of loss there, and we need to acknowledge that. So the world of January 2020 is not coming back. But here's the solace for that. The values we held in January 2020, will likely be the values that will shape when things are safe to reopen. But work will be very different. We talk about the hybrid workplace. So who comes back, who doesn't? What are the choices that businesses and organizations will make? And who wants to come back, who doesn't? And all of these kinds of things. So what we need to exert, and it's a theme in Grace Notes, is resilience. How do I handle that? And there's a wonderful thought that I've taken from Eileen McDarg that talks about resilience is bouncing forward. And it really is, because if you think about it, certainly where we are, the world we left isn't coming back, but we are transformed. And so how do we adapt to this transformation? And we're creating the new normal. So the transformation certainly is not complete. And that's the type of things. And this is where grace really comes in, because what's the culture that we want to exist in now? How do we want to make this a better place? How can we take the tragedy and the catastrophe that has befallen us and come out better? And because failing to do that will be a lost opportunity. And so that's one of the things, themes I get at. And it's rooted to purpose. What kind of a person am I? What do I want to do coming out of this? And doing now. It's not a process of waiting per se, because it's things you need to be thinking and doing now to prepare yourself to integrate into this new normal, which is being defined as we go forward. So
Very well said. And I think that term new normal scares a lot of people, right? Because they don't want a new normal. They want to go back to the old normal. And I think to some degree, all of us, that's our natural, right? We naturally resist change. And whether we like it or not, there's just some things that have happened that it's really impossible to go back, right? So there's, like you said, the January of 2020 is not coming back. And I remember saying, back in April when the pandemic was really starting to kind of come full on scene, that there were three types of people out there. That there were those that were panicking, which never does any good. There were those that were pandering, which were just kind of waiting for this thing to blow over and giving in to whatever circumstances they found themselves in. And then there were those that were pivoting. There were those that were really seeing what was happening and saying, okay, how can I take whatever it is that I do or whoever it is that I am and contribute differently in this time to come out of this differently than how we went into it? And my friend, Gabrielle Boucher, who wrote the book, The Purpose Factor, she said we had a choice to either consume, be consumed, or to create. And, I feel like there's a lot of people that really are still stuck in that. It's been a year. What would you have to say to some leaders? I know we both have heard in the coaching realm, the 7 words of any dying organization, which is, we've always done it this way. Right. Right. So what would you say to those organizations, those leaders, and those individuals that are out there that are saying, you know what? I don't want to pivot. I don't want to create. I don't want to change. I don't want to hear anything about the new normal. I just want to go back to the way things were.
Well, I would say, what did you do with your horse stable when the car took over? And it's not going to be quite that dramatic, but life is all about change. Change is not unique to any time. And we are born, we are mature, and we die. So sadly, the sad part of this is that some businesses are lost permanently, particularly in retail, and most especially in excuse me, in restaurants. So yes, restaurants will come back, but they'll come back in a different way, as will movie theaters. So it's essentially, the old saying that Rosabeth Moss Cantor said is, we only change when it hurts too much not to change. Well, it's hurting a lot, so we will change. In a sense, you don't have a choice. You either have to change or adapt, but at the same time, don't lose your values or your purpose. If you have a grounded purpose on whatever it may be, that will transcend, that will guide you into the new normal. So I would say, yes, adapt things, but that doesn't mean you are changing yourself as a person. You're simply adapting. So I think that would be my advice.
I think that's great advice. And I think, there's a lot of organizations and people that are talking about purpose. There's a lot of, convolution around what purpose is. But what you just said about kind of remembering, almost kind of this remembering of why you started, right? That core, beginning, that purpose point, if you will. And now you need to adapt to not just stay relevant, not just as a business decision, but again, to contribute to the greater good, right? As Patrick Lencioni says, he says that the purpose of any organization is to leave people better off or to contribute to humanity in some better way. And, how are we doing that? We saw that happen in the pandemic. We saw, automotive companies stop making cars and start making ventilators. We saw clothing companies stop making clothes and start making masks. We saw, alcohol distilleries stop making, vodka, whiskey, and tequila and start making hand sanitizer, as terrible as it smelled for a period of time. But, you need to adapt to meet the overall need of society and those around you, wherever you're at right now.
Absolutely. And adaptation is simply a form of change, and we do it naturally. Our bodies do it. So why won't our organizations? And at the same time, there's good behavioral studies about organizations that they might have a certain lifespan. And, just like people, they grow, they get bigger, and then they maybe outlive their usefulness. Well, that's not a crime per se. As long as the people who in them have an opportunity to do something different, and then that's a fine. It's not the end of the world there. So
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So we're coming up on the end of our time here together, and I want to make sure that you had mentioned a lot about, this concept of grace under pressure, especially in an upside down world. I can't emphasize enough right now how we all need grace for ourselves. We need to extend grace to each other, and we really need to figure out how we are moving forward in this season into whatever is next to contribute at a greater level. For those who want to hear more about this concept of grace under pressure, your new work coming out, Grace Notes, where could they find that? When would that be coming out? How can they continue to follow you?
Thank you, Devin. The resource for almost everything of mine is my website, johnbaldoni.com. And that has access to what I do and information about grace and all of the dimensions. And if you put a hash, or if you put a slash grace at the end of johnbaldoni.com, it'll take you to the pages of grace, if you will, which are articles and videos and information about things. And then, of course, I have the LinkedIn Live show, which I call Grace Under Pressure, which is Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, and it's streamed on LinkedIn Live as well as your platforms here. And that's all collected on my website as well. So
awesome.
Thank you.
I appreciate the work that you're doing, the contribution that you have made for many years and continue to make to help individuals and organizations continue to fulfill the purpose that they're created for. Final word here for those listening today. If this was the last thing that you were going to say to anybody, what would it be?
I have this standard saying, be seen, be heard, be there. So be seen by your people, be heard, stay on message and listen, and then be there. And be there is the all-encompassing thing. Be connected to them.
So good. Awesome. John, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate you. And I look forward to continuing to follow your work and look forward to Grace Notes when that comes out. And for those of you listening today, I encourage you, follow John Baldoni at johnbaldoni.com. Follow him on LinkedIn. Check out his LinkedIn Live, Grace Under Pressure. And John, once again, we appreciate you. We appreciate your time. Thank you for the difference that you continue to make in the lives of so many.
Thank you, Devin. We had fun today, so I appreciate this opportunity.
My pleasure. Thank you, John. Until next time on the Finding Purpose LiveCast. We'll see you then.